You're listening to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, the go-to podcast for high performers. I'm Andrew Moses. Each week, you'll hear my thought-provoking conversations with Olympians, pro athletes, CEOs, elite coaches, best-selling authors, and other high performers to uncover their secrets to success. Get ready to be inspired each week when we talk about leadership, teamwork, work ethic, and more. Are you ready? Let's go. Hi, everyone. This week, my guest is Jennifer Moss. Jennifer is a world-renowned international speaker and expert on workplace wellness and happiness. She is the author of the book, The Burnout Epidemic, The Rise of Chronic Stress, and How We Can Fix It. Her first book, Unlocking Happiness at Work, was named the UK Business Book of the Year. Jennifer has been named a Canadian Innovator of the Year, an International Female Entrepreneur of the Year, and is a recipient of the Public Service Award from the Office of President Barack Obama. With burnout and stress at record levels, I thought Jennifer would be the perfect person to talk to and explore what leaders can do to prevent burnout and build organizations and teams that are healthier, happier, and more productive. Let me tell you, Jennifer delivered. In our conversation, she shared bold strategies and actionable advice that will help all of us better serve others. I learned a ton and hope you do too. So let's pull the tarp and get straight to Jennifer Moss. Jennifer, I can't wait to dig into this all. There's so much that you talk about and you cover that is so fascinating to me, and I know to all of the listeners. Where I want to begin, it's really timely that we're having this conversation around burnout and stress, because this is something that everybody's talking about more than ever. But what I'm curious about, Jennifer, and to start our conversation, are we more burnt out now, or are we all just talking about it more?
I think both. Really, we have been burned out for a long time. We've been talking about it. There's been so much more culture of always being on. Technology has changed the social contract that we've had with work and life, and it's really started to become impactful. It's why, we changed the definition around burnout in 2019, and the World Health Organization got involved because there's real catastrophic impacts to burnout. But the pandemic just exacerbated, it just exploded, everything that was leading up. And then when we tried to basically put the future of work, which would have taken decades. I don't even know if this is what the future of work would have looked like without the pandemic, but we jammed it into the shortest time period of change, and it highlighted what was already a big problem. So both, we're talking about it more because people can't sustain this, and we are burning out more than we were before.
So let's backpedal a little bit. You mentioned that in 2019, the definition of burnout changed. Mm-hmm. What changed? What is the definition of burnout for everybody who's not familiar?
Yeah, burnout has had this sort of nebulous, non-defined definition, and everyone kind of just has these sort of meme-like imaginings of what burnout is, like the guy work piled up on his desk, or it's like a soccer mom trying with FOMO, all her kids are and everything, she's juggling work and life, or it could be someone that is smoking too many drugs. We've got this idea of a burnout scenario that isn't actually defined for what is really a major problem. And in 2019, when the World Health Organization identified burnout as an occupational phenomena, it is workplace stress left unmanaged. It's institutional stress left unmanaged. It shows up in three major signs: extreme exhaustion and depletion, emotional distance from our work. So that level of disengagement, but not how we think of disengagement, like not productive, but more just we don't feel like we add value anymore. We're not good at our jobs. We're not contributing. And then finally, in high levels of cynicism. So feeling hopeless, feeling really negative about our work, feeling like there's nothing that we can do to change things. We have no agency. So that's really what the WHO did for people like us in this research, to say, okay, let's stop putting all these different definitions on it so that we can remove that responsibility from the individual to solve it on their own, and actually create some accountability for the institutions that are causing them that stress in the first place.
By definition, burnout really is specific to professional settings, is what you're saying there?
Exactly. And that is, I mean, there's been a lot of argument. It took 40 years of researchers highly engaged in this research to push this through. So it was a milestone to say, okay, we've been failing at treating it because we're not looking at the root causes, and understanding that it is a workplace phenomena totally changes the way that we're addressing it now.
So has historically the onus been put on the individual to manage their own personal health and well-being? And now there's a context shift where we're saying now the employer, the institution is responsible and the leaders in that organization are responsible.
Yeah, it's more of an ecosystem problem to solve. So we still have personalities at risk, high levels of perfectionism, and, high performers are more at risk. We can see passion-driven burnout. We still need to model self-care and take care of ourselves, but it's not that self-care alone will be what solves for burnout. I mean, I could listen to rain for 15 seconds, on an app. I could have better sleep. I could take a meetingless Fridays, and that's great. But if we're not solving for workload, or if I'm continuing to experience a pay gap, or, and I'm making 68 cents on the dollar as a woman to my male counterparts, if there's systemic discrimination inside of my organization, if there's no paid family leave, and the list goes on, these are things that I can't control. So I can only control so much of preventing my burnout. But when it comes to the big root causes, I need my leaders and my organizations to support that, or I'm not going to make any dent in preventing my burnout or dealing with my burnout after I've actually hit that wall.
So Jennifer, let's dig into that, because this show, Everybody Pulls the Tarp, is all about leading by example and leadership and teamwork and work ethic. And I know one of the things I do want to explore with you is the concept of work ethic and how we look at work ethic. But let's talk first about leaders and what responsibility leaders have to help solve this problem as the leaders of the institutions that you're describing. So what are some of the things that leaders at organizations that are best in class in your mind are doing today to help stem this issue?
One of the real problems that I have experienced in changing organizations to be thinking more critically about this is realizing that there's so much legacy. I mean, we just have a legacy of burnout. We have this stoicism, this sort of pride in how many hours we work. We hear, leaders of tech companies saying like it takes you to work 80 hours a week to make a difference or to like change lives. And, in healthcare, it's this badge of pride to work these consecutive 18-hour shifts. And so that is a real problem. And so leaders have a major role in walking the talk, and that the only way that we can change it if leaders are modeling self-care, are modeling the behaviors. Employees can't be what they can't see. And if you're saying, okay, well, you take in the weekend and disconnect. I want us to have right to disconnect guidelines where at night, you have this space that is separate for you and work-life balance. Oh, but I'm going to just, work on my own time, and put a nice little disclaimer at the end of my email saying, I just work on my own time, but you don't need to work on my hours. But you're sending it at 11 o'clock at night to a subordinate, this email. That employee will feel this invisible pressure to perform. And it creates a lot of inequities. We also see this in organizations right now that I think are doing really good work. They're realizing that burnout prevention and wellness are they need to be a bit bifurcated, where, we can optimize with all these really great perks that are still useful. They're wonderful. I mean, having vacation time, having breaks, all those things are excellent. But to really make change, you need to be helping people from falling into the river instead of pulling them out downstream. We need to give more water instead of ice cream to people that need it. And that's a lot of what's happening. So understanding that burnout prevention is like mental health first aid, making sure that we have peer support groups, making sure that we are truly leading by allowing people work-life balance and chance to disconnect, managing workload, reducing meeting fatigue. I mean, making sure that there's equity in care leave, stop calling it paternity and maternity leave, making, and reducing that exclusionary language. We need paid family leaves. We need grief policies. Like, these are all the tiny policy shifts that leaders need to do to consider burnout prevention versus the perks and the motivation piece that happens when our employees are well.
Jennifer, I'm curious, you mentioned work-life balance. How do we define work-life balance? Is that something that's defined differently by everybody? How do you do that?
To be honest, I hate the term work-life balance. I write about it in the book. It's not the right term. But at the same time, I mean, work-life integration isn't really been that helpful, because now we're integrating our work and life so overwhelmingly bad that we're never, ever off. We don't know what the difference is between home life and work life, et cetera. I think that right now it's more about work-life boundaries. What are the right boundaries so that we can have sustainability, and understanding that we need to have, that kind of space between work and life that's healthy. But we also need to understand that our own behaviors play a lot of role in this. I mean, we've just gone from this entire, 2 years of being in this emergency threat, right? We're just focused on being urgent all the time. And so now we develop these really bad habits as individuals that everything is urgent. So we have to respond so quickly to everything. We're not ever asking people, what is the deadline on this? When is this actually due? We hear these, beeps and alerts and noises, and our body literally responds with a cortisol, like flood. And so we need to step back and pause. Emergencies by definition are unexpected. This is no longer unexpected. We need to have both, again, like that ecosystem. We need to have leaders, organizations, us as individuals take a pause and say, okay, what does it mean to have boundaries? What is important to me? I just spent the last 2.5 years kind of, facing my mortality. Is work like the end all and be all, or should I be considering what I want to think about for the rest of my life? And so I think it's a very fluid term, but we're really doing it badly right now at creating those disconnects.
So how can leaders start the conversation? I mean, you mentioned walking the walk, right? Leaders have to do what they say that they want their team members to do. But how can leaders start the conversation about whether we call it work-life balance or we call it work-life integration, or we call it better working and better living? How do we start the conversation?
Well, I mean, it really needs to be leader-led. I know that and I want to give individuals tools, and I talk a lot about tools that individuals can have to protect their own boundaries. But when it really comes down to it, it's sort of a place of privilege to say no to more work, or tell your boss, like, you can't, add on this extra thing. There's some people in organizations that feel that they have that privilege, and that's great. But I would say statistically, most people just have to do what their boss tells them to do. So it really does need to be leader led, and leaders saying, I want to know what's going on, like actual authentic empathy. And I really see that empathy in leadership is the critical skill that will be what defines high performing organizations in the future. And when you look at like that Microsoft trends in 2022, the trends report actually showed that the reason why 41% of the workforce want to quit is because of their first workload was number one, but second was lack of empathy from their employer. And so when you think about the role that the leader needs to play now, it is actively listening. It's finding out what matters. So the first thing a leader needs to say to their team, and direct managers really need to be empowered to have these conversations, is, what is going on? Are you feeling burned out? And let's assess. If you know enough about burnout, like, what are the root causes? Is it overwork? Are you feeling like you're not being rewarded or recognized? Do you feel like you're lonely? Is there a lack of community? What are those things that are impacting you? And how can I, within my purview, within my capacity, help to fix that? And it can be just small interventions that you're testing, you're agile, you're trialing something. Okay, that this is the thing, it's workload, and you're feeling like we need to reduce it. Okay, let's spend some time looking at inefficiencies, for example. Best research and really tell leaders to look at this. That is this radical, non-radical idea of a 32-hour work week. The reason why they're successful is because it's just about reducing inefficiencies, being respectful, reducing meeting fatigue. So spend some time with your team and say, okay, how often, are you working on your priority needs? How often do your urgent needs come in and knock you off of that? How about meetings? How many meetings are you in that you don't feel are valuable to you? Are you just being brought into meetings because we have to feel like we're looped into everything? Have these conversations about where the inefficiencies are, strip them, test it for 2 months, and then ask them again, are you still burning out? Okay, well, if you are, try something new. If you're not, then what we're doing is working. So these are the kind of like very small interventions, pilot projects, direct manager led, very simple to operationalize and free. And then, test and iterate. And then over time, you'll just create this shift.
Jennifer, do you think productivity, like the word productivity, has gotten like a bad rap? Is productivity like a good word or a bad word? I'm kind of torn on that. I mean, we're conditioned to think it's a good word, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a false measure. And I say that because when you look at the data out of the pandemic, we were hitting all of our productivity goals, but we're working 3 hours more per day to hit those pre-COVID goals. And so we did see, we can still be productive. And once we got over the learning curve, those that improved a bit. The learning curve was so steep, right? In that beginning, managers didn't know how to really lead remotely. There's a whole bunch of sort of inertia there, but we still are working more to hit the same pre-COVID goals. And then we're being asked to hit stretch goals. And there's been growth in certain industries that have just been like, over the top. And so people are still kind of expecting their employees to work business as usual, not understanding that that's not sustainable. Like look at the airline industry, for example. Airlines are still pumping out all these flight options, but no one can go anywhere and luggage is being lost. And, people are stuck in the airport for 10 hours. Think that's extrapolated across all industries. We're saying, okay, we can still behave as we behaved before, and I'm not going to change anything, but everything else is saying, stop. We cannot sustain this way of behaving. This has changed us. This is different. We need to adjust to this new paradigm.
Is it that we just keep pushing, like we just keep moving the goalpost? We figure something out and then we say, okay, well, the goal could be bigger. And then we figure it out. We say the goal can be bigger. And that's what's not sustainable?
Yeah, and that's not new. That's been going on for a very long time. We don't ever really stop and think, okay, is it innovate or die? Is it capitalism at all costs or growth at all costs? Or is it, well, it's actually very expensive for me to turn over 40% of my employees. And so it ends up downstream that I'm still paying the price for that. So yeah, we grew, but the attrition expense is so high, and we're living too much in the moment of this is exciting, we're growing, this is great. And, we're seeing all these great rebounds and that's exciting. We're not actually understanding that there's these downstream impacts of that. Nursing shortage right now, for example, is closing down hospitals. Our communities can't be served. People are unsafe. There's people talking, this woman was interviewed the other day and she said, my hospital shut down. I'm 8.5 months pregnant. I'm terrified that what if this is the day that I have to deliver my child and my hospital shut down? So we have to kind of look a bit further and broader on this picture as a whole of what burnout actually causes. And it's not just like, employees just want to take a break and they're tired. It has real economic, negative impacts if we're not thinking about it strategically.
I've heard a lot of leaders say that our youngest career generation, so the folks that are coming out of high school and coming out of college, some leaders will say that generation doesn't seem like they want to work hard. They don't seem like they're as motivated as we all once were. What's some of the research and some of your perspectives saying about that?
Well, and I kind of groan at this idea that burnout is a whiny millennial problem or, Gen Z problem. I think that they just have different desires. They understand that passion for their work, breeds inspiration. And that's a healthy thing, that they want to have balance in their lives. They want to have family and kids and all those things and don't want to sacrifice that just for a job. And I think that's, fair. And we need to start thinking like maybe that's a good approach to life. But at the same time, when we look at, and my data says the same thing in the research that we did inside the pandemic, same issue, Gen Zs, older Gen Zs and younger millennials are the most burned out group. And it's not just because, they're lacking inspiration. They always need to be inspired and, have all these perks and benefits. It's because they have huge student debt. They have come into an environment. Some of them started their job in a pandemic. They don't know their boss. They don't know their coworkers. And when you actually look at the data, people that started in the pandemic have a way less healthy experience of productive relationships. It's significantly different than those who started before the pandemic. So that's a problem. Then you also have high control, low agency as a young person just starting out in their career. They can't say this is too tough. I can't work these hours. There is this kind of golden carrot and almost like a hazing in some companies, in tech and finance and healthcare. It's like, how many hours can you possibly work before you pass out? And then that means, oh, maybe we can move to the next rung. So they're in this environment. And then there's loneliness and isolation. A lot of our younger generation have moved to urban centers. They're in single occupancy dwellings. They're not with family anymore because they're driven to these places because that's where the jobs were. And then they have a pandemic that totally isolates them from their relationships. And so we've got a kind of a perfect storm within that group. And so kind of instead of just putting a brand that they just won't work, let's understand really the nuances of their experience of work, which is much different than someone that's tenured, that's getting paid well, that already has a brand established, that can make choices about their work and life very differently than those younger folks.
So Jennifer, how do we cultivate, as leaders, how do we cultivate people who are gritty and scrappy and determined and willing to do those unglamorous things when necessary, but also create an environment where there is the right balance? It feels like we're really trying to strike a balance here.
It is. And you know what? We all, whatever, demographic we belong to, we all want to be connected to the value of the work and feel like what we're doing is contributing. I mean, one of the root causes of burnout is a values mismatch or like lack of work life or lack of fit, feeling like I'm not really engaged in this. I don't connect to the values of the organization. I don't feel like I belong in this job. And it also, shows up in just that level of, disconnection from our work. And so much of what happens when we are so focused on process and getting people to that place of like doing it in the way that we as leaders want it done, or focusing less on allowing people to job craft and create their own way to those goals and giving them the freedom to get there with those expectations to be, okay, here's the goal, figure out whatever way you want to get to that goal. That is how we, really enthuse those younger professionals, any professional across the board, and then make it so that they are intrinsically motivated. We don't care if someone scores a goal in a game, how they score it. It can be soccer, they go left or right or whatever, they, bump the ball off their head, whatever it is that they do to get to that goal is just get there, right? And so we need to give people that ability to move in different directions to be able to get to that finish line. And when they get there, they're excited. They feel connected to that pace or however way they got there. It's not about, how it's just sharing the why for people. And so a lot of what we've seen lately, especially in the pandemic, is because managers aren't able to just see people. They're like, they're not having that serendipitous collision and asking about how people's lives are, et cetera. Instead, what's happening is that they have to kind of micromanage. There's bossware that's increased. More managers are asking people to show process. We're not actually just having those moments of like even the lame eating the cake in the lunchroom to celebrate birthdays. Like none of that kind of fun stuff is happening. And so it's really drawing people away from work, making work feel like it's school without recess or gym or extracurriculars. It's just all work. And so that is what we need to get back, is this sense of purpose and joy in what we do.
In some ways, Jennifer, it almost feels as though the pandemic showed us maybe what a more robotic, operationally efficient, in theory, work existence could look like. And at the end of the day, that's not what's healthy. So how do leaders take the best of both worlds? Like take what the COVID experience has accelerated and taught us and shown us the art of the possible, but make sure we swing the pendulum back to get to a healthy place. How do we start reconciling all that?
You nailed it on the head, like this idea of the possibility piece. I think if we don't see it as, the possibility or the opportunity, then this has just become a waste of time. Like we can't waste a crisis. In the startup world, we always call it that. My husband is a former pro athlete, and it was always like, how do we, not waste this loss, even if it was like, undefeated all year, losing the playoffs. The first thing you're doing postmortem is saying like, what did we learn? And this sucked, but what did we learn? We need to have that balance. And it's really based on cool research, the dialectical theory of opposites, this idea that two things can be true at the same time. We have dealt with this trauma that has been very difficult. It's really hard, but we've also learned how to adapt. We've developed, emotional flexibility. We've developed this capacity for hope theory, which is creating plan Bs, plan Cs, plan Zs to be able to navigate around really difficult scenarios, and having this increase of social emotional intelligence collectively across the workforce can be transformational as long as we see, okay, what did we gain? What are the habits we built that we need to let go of, and we need to pause and say, okay, I don't want that anymore. How do we rethink things like the future of work? What does hybrid look like? Yeah, so we've realized we can work remotely, but that doesn't mean that we should just all go back to the office, 5 days a week and be on Zoom. We need to be thinking about let's gathering together, let's creating productive work, relationships while we're together, change the way the office is, and make remote work about working heads down, figuring out what it is. No one really knows how to create that Goldilocks zone. I found, there's some that are doing really good work with it. But like, for example, Hewlett Packard, realizing that family really matters, they've created, instead of, and I write about this in the book, about life on site is like a big thing for tech companies. It was all about the campus. Like, I'll do your dry cleaning, I'll massage your feet under your desk, and, you can just work all day long and be here. And if I see you, that means you're working. Hewlett Packard has said, we understand this has changed the values for employees. So how about, instead of having a chef on site cooking people dinner, why don't we have a chef on site that gives you ready to take home meals so you can be with your family earlier? How do we think about the office, instead of it about being just, again, going there to be on Zoom calls? How about we create this as a maker space on site and expand our campus to be more about outdoor space and outdoor meetings and gatherings? I mean, that's just one example of many, of just rethinking what this crisis has taught us and then changing everything. This is paradigm shifting. How are we going to actually look at this in a totally new construct? Because I think those are the organizations that are going to just be so much more competitive than all the ones that just want to jam the toothpaste back in the tube.
Jennifer, I'm curious. One of the questions people ask me all the time is, if you're doing something that you love, can you still get burnt out? Can you still get, defeated? I'm curious your take on that.
That's a great question. And I wrote an article in 2018, 2019 about how this idea, love what you do, never work a day in your life, is a total myth. And, I work really hard, and I am so prone to burnout because I am very passionate about the work. I love it. I care about it. I feel like it's mission driven. And so that, for those people that feel that way, 100% that they are, at risk of burning out. However, a lot of the research that I've done has also said that inspiration and passion can be a buffer to burnout. It's like this really fine line. And there's research around passion-driven burnout, and they say that we should have harmonious passion versus obsessive passion. And so this idea where when it's harmonious, we still are engaging in things in our life that give us happiness that are outside of work. We understand that there is the work that can fuel us, that plays a role in our lives that's really important and is actually really healthy for us. But when it gets to the point where we're not sustaining anything else in our lives that gives us pleasure other than this focus of work, that's when it becomes dangerous. That's when relationships are impacted. That's when we're exhausted. That's when we burn out. And so we as individuals, especially if we're the ones that are entrepreneurs or people that are like leaders, we make up our own rules. We are really prone. We have to just remind ourselves, like almost wear the hat of a boss and we're the employee and say, have you taken breaks? Are you eating? Are you saying yes to things because you have FOMO and you don't actually, you're not going to do well at that. You're just saying yes to too many things. How do you create schematics around your priorities? And so that has been a lesson learned, is that passion is important and it's a buffer, but it can also be dangerous if it becomes obsessive.
So Jennifer, before we wrap up, if all of the research and work that you're doing on a daily basis continues to be successful and advances the ball, where are we in 10 years?
That is a great question, because there are some industries that I think remain at risk, and healthcare and some of these others are really, I worry about those groups. What does that look like? Because the more burnout that they're getting right now, if we don't stop it right now, we're going to see a shortage and then it's going to be a real issue. So I'm hoping that there is an awareness that we've created more conversations around mental illness, mental health, and burnout inside of organizations, that we're not just going to say, okay, now that there's a potential recession, that employees have less control and employers are just going to go back to that mindset of, I don't really care about you. We need to look at this as not just a moment in time that is going to go away and we can just put the pandemic behind us. I'm really hoping that there have been some infrastructure changes, some mindset changes. And I just wrote an article for HBR that talks about some organizations really stripping away their thinking on, what this next step looks like for them. And once we start to see that employees are happier, they're more likely to stay, that they are describing better job satisfaction and that burnout's reduced, and revenues improved, and all the metrics that matter to organizations are demonstrating that this investment is worthwhile, which I actually cautiously optimistically believe is going to happen, then they're here to stay, because it really is about measuring and demonstrating that these shifts that we're making are good for the long-term competitiveness of the organizations that adopt them.
Jennifer, we're going to have to pick up this conversation every little bit of time, because I feel like this is evolving. I'm going to want to check in with you in a couple of years and just see where this thing is going. This is really fascinating. And I think you're right. I think these fundamental shifts are ultimately going to be better for everybody, right? It's not just going to be better and more healthy for the employee. I think this is going to be better for everybody, for industry. And you're doing such fantastic work. And that's exactly why I wanted to have this conversation with you, Jennifer, because we're all out there pulling the tarp. We're all working hard, leading by example. But how do we pull the tarp and treat ourselves well, treat our teams well, and all those around us to maximize our happiness and our wellness? Thank you so much, Jennifer, for spending a few minutes with me this week.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation. Thanks for hosting.
Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of tarp pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Twitter at Andrew H. Moses. That's Andrew H. Moses. And be sure to sign up for my email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Today's a great day to pull the tarp. I am rooting for you. See you next time.